In our last message, we looked at how God's promise is different than all other promises and expectations like that Abraham and Joseph would have had for their relationship with God. That this was unusual for them, and it took some work because God was calling them not to follow a list of commands or rules or things like that, but saying to them, "I want to be in relationship with you." And this is, we are going to make a covenant together. And in a covenant, there are two parts to this. There's giving and receiving that come from both sides that are involved in this. And so we give to God our faithfulness, and we receive from God his presence with us. Now, I know that is something that's a little bit harder to figure out. What does it mean to say that God's presence is with us? Because, again, we are still used to dealing with like material things that we can hold, that we can understand. And to say that God's presence is with us is a challenge for us to figure out. And so we watch as God teaches us what that means. What does it mean to be in his presence? What does it mean for that to happen? God goes with us, and he does this by helping us to mark important places or times or events. And it could be through celebrations or in times when we are looking for things like security and safety and stability, times of hardship and struggle. Sometimes those are the most important places where God takes us and momentarily takes us apart from what is causing our hurt and our pain to a place where we can find comfort and understanding and find a way of going forward from here. In the Old Testament, we are often told stories of folks who build altars to mark those important places or important events. Sometimes they will even build rock monuments that are using the rocks that they just find around them. There's no special rocks. They don't go to like a pre-first century, multi-thousand years ago Hobby Lobby to find the perfect rocks that they can use for this. But they just find the rocks that are around and they stack them up. So you can look at them and say, well, rocks don't normally form like this. So someone is here, this is marked for something. But they're just regular rocks that they find. But to mark a place, to mark an event, to build an altar for worship, to set that place apart as being holy. God teaches how to do that. And in process of doing that, draws us in to his presence, teaching us how to set ourselves up to know that he is with us. And sometimes it feels like, well, that's just fancy decorating. Why can't we just skip over those things? Why can't we just skip over building things or setting places apart or any of that sort of stuff? And that seems to make sense to us. So, well, why can't we just be in God's presence? And it's because it's a process being drawn into God's presence. And as we go to prepare places to be there, that is when God is working on us, not just for the place to be prepared, but for us to be prepared as well. And so this morning we're taking a look at one of those stories where God does this. And this comes from the very first Passover. We're now in the book of Exodus. And so I want you to think back to the book of Exodus. Think about a few questions, and I'm going to ask you and give you a moment to respond to them, and then we'll kind of go through that part of the story to get us all caught up together. And so the first one is, in the book of Exodus, where are the Hebrew people? Remember, what country are they in? Yeah, if you said Egypt, that's where they are. They are now in Egypt, and so now the next question is, what are they doing in Egypt? All right, they were enslaved. They had been enslaved a long time ago, and so that's what they were doing. And so as we pick the story up in Exodus chapter 12, there are a numbered series of events that have taken place before this. And what are those events? What are those things that have been happening, and how many of them had there been before we get to the story of the Passover? The plagues. The plagues were those things that had come before, and there have been 9 of them up to this point. There are going to be 10 in total, but there have been 9 up until this point. And so remember how we got here. When we finished in our previous message, the book of Genesis, Joseph had brought his family to settle into Egypt, brought Egypt out of a tremendous drought. They had all gotten back together. Everyone had lived happily ever after, and his family had all settled in the land of Egypt. Well, that ended the very first book of the Bible. Then we start into the book of Exodus. And it starts with the statement that the pharaohs who then came to power didn't know who Joseph was, didn't know who the Hebrew people were, and saw this foreign group of people. And they kept growing in number, growing and growing and growing, because remember, part of God's promise to them was that they would continue to grow. And so they were there, they were getting bigger in number. The Egyptian people were starting to get afraid of them. And so Pharaoh says, wow, that was a crazy thing to say. Pharaoh then says, we can't have this, and enslaves all of the Hebrew people. And so by the time Moses comes along, they had been enslaved for a very long period of time. And Moses is being sent by God to go and to free his people. Now, Pharaoh is very stubborn in all of this. And Pharaoh doesn't want to let them go. And so there have been, up to the point where the Passover comes, 9 plagues meant as encouragement to get Pharaoh to let God's people go, but Pharaoh was not doing it. And so something big is coming. And I think the Hebrew people knew this, Moses knew this, God knows this, and God knows most importantly that because of this thing that is coming, they need to be made ready for it. They need to be prepared for it. And so God talks to Moses and says, here's what you need to tell them. Here's what they need to do. And so we get into Exodus chapter 12, and they are preparing now for the Passover. And we have what seems like this very long list of instructions for what they should do, and all this sort of stuff. And we can look at these. Verses 1 to 3 are the instructions saying, your calendar is going to be marked from here going forward. This is going to be the first day of your year, and here's when you're going to have the Passover, and you're going to do this every year, giving them the instructions for what this was going to look like in the future. And then verses 3 to 6 are all about the lamb and how big the lamb should be and how many people will it feed and how many households and what do you do with that to prepare to find the lamb to be used for this Passover sacrifice. And then verse 7 is about taking the blood from the lamb and using that to mark the doors around the houses so when the Passover comes, that they will be passed over, that they are being marked by this lamb's blood as being God's people. And then verses 8 to 12 with this long list of how you cook the lamb and the ways to do it and the ways not to do it and how you are to eat it and how much of it and what you should be wearing and how should you be standing or sitting and how fast or how slow should you eat it. Lots of instructions that all come from this. And that's a lot of rules to do to get ready for this Passover. But what God is doing here is he's teaching his people, because they all know that something is coming, teaching them how to be in his presence so that they can be prepared and made ready, so that they can be comforted and strengthened for what is still to come. And in fact, we watch as God will do this multiple times. We're going to jump forward now into Luke's gospel, quite a ways forward from the first Passover to Luke chapter 22, when Jesus is getting ready to celebrate the Passover with his disciples in a different time and in a different place. And yet Jesus knows that something big is coming. And he knows that his disciples are going to need to be made ready for it. And so he is getting them ready to enter into God's presence so they can be prepared for what is to come. And so Jesus says to some of his disciples, go into town and you're going to find a man carrying some water. You find him, follow him to the home that he goes to, ask the owner of the house if he's got a room that you can use, and he's going to lead you to an upstairs room that we can use for the Passover. That's pretty specific, but they do that, and they find the space so they can celebrate the Passover together, so they can be drawn into God's presence. God is preparing them, whether we are in Exodus or Luke. He's getting them ready and helping them to prepare a special place where they can be with God, where they can find safety and security and stability, where they can be made ready for the big things that are coming. And this is all something that we still do now. And it's something important that we do now, that we prepare places to go and to be in God's presence that help us to focus on God, that to let go of the other things that are competing for our time and our attention, to help us to draw close to God, knowing that he is always there, but sometimes, I don't know about you, but life can get hard. And we've seen that this week. And it can be hard to know that God is with us, and yet he seeks to draw us still into his presence. And so in this message, we're going to set up kind of our own holy place, our own holy space. So I'm going to need to do a little bit of work now. We're going to do some moving around of some stuff, and so that you can see all of the things that we have that are going to be a part of this. I'm going to try and make this. We're going to see how this goes this morning. So you can see that we have a whole new kind of space set up here in our sanctuary. This is different if you have been in worship with us before now, then since we returned back to worship and have celebrated communion, you know that it still doesn't look like it did before everything shut down. And that's okay. Because one of the things that we have to remember is that as God helps us to prepare a space to be in his presence, it's going to look different every time because it's always dependent on the time and the context and what's going on that help draw us together. And so we have this table that has been here that we have used for communion in the past since we came back, and it was intentional. We didn't go all the way back to having communion elements on the back table because things at times are different now, and things are different now, and that's okay. And we need to, part of it is that we can still celebrate some of the things that we always do, but also to know that it is still different, and that we can't hide from that differentness. And so we have a table here, but we've got it set up differently. Now we have it draped in a white cloth. White is the color that we see on our altar cloths and vestments and paraments for the big holy days, for Easter, for Christmas, for communion, for other times that remind us of God's holiness and that Christ is risen. And then on there we have, let me scoot over this direction. On the far end is a Bible. Normally it sits back on our main altar, but I brought it forward for today because this is our reminder that we are in covenant with God, and that as a part of that covenant, this is our faithfulness. This is our story, reminding us to be faithful followers of God as we tell that story. And then on the other side of the table is a lit candle, and this is God's presence with us. This is the light of Christ come into the world. God's presence with us, and it is active, it is moving. It's why it's always so good to be able to use a candle, because we can see it moving, see it living, and we can see its presence here with us. And then in between the two are the elements for communion, the bread and the juice. Now, this morning, we don't have a way of doing online communion in the Methodist Church. But so what I'm going to be showing you is how we have set our space up. But this is not a thing that we can just do on our own, but in fact, we can all set our spaces up to receive, to be in God's presence, whether for communion or just for a time of prayer. And I need to show you one more other part of our space that is different. I need to angle you down a little bit here. There we go. There is on either side of our altar rail. Let me get you down a little bit farther there. There we go. There is a little table set up that we'll have our communion tray set up on. And they are draped in the altar cloths that normally are up on our main altar. And this is because the time we're in is different. We can't celebrate communion in the ways that we normally do. And over the last few months, I've been trying to figure out how do we do this in a good way. And taking advice from friends, but also through prayer and reflection, we have our trays of juice will be set out here, but they're being tied into our space because they are sharing the same altar cloths that we normally have in other places that are drawing us together, drawing us all together in this space with one another. And so this is our space. This is who we are. Let me put you back up here. This is our time and our holy space that God is drawing us into his presence. But like I said, this is, while you won't be sharing in communion with us today, we're going to go through part of that service as a reminder for us that this is not a complicated thing or an expensive thing or a one single right way, or we have to spend a lot of money to have all of the right stuff. But we are reminded that God creates holy spaces to draw us into his presence. in lots of different ways, using the things that are all around us. Like Jesus at the Last Supper, he was creating a space for his disciples. And there was nothing fancy about the room. There was nothing fancy about the food, the bread, or the wine. And yet, they were common, they were regular, but in Jesus' hands, they become something different as we are drawn into that presence. Jesus took the bread that was there on the table. This was not fancy bread. This was unleavened bread that they used in their time. If you've ever seen matzah bread, you know it's like this flat cracker wafer thing. It creates a real mess when you break it. That was the common bread that they had. It was the bread that Moses and the people ate back at the first Passover. We have what is common bread for us. This is the unofficial bread of Protestant churches. This is King's Hawaiian bread. You can find it pretty much anywhere. It's nothing super special, except I think it's tasty. Again, the bread itself is not as important as what happens when Jesus took that bread, and in teaching his disciples how to prepare that place, he lifted it up, he gave thanks to God, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples, and he said to them, "Take and eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat it in remembrance of me." And then Jesus took the cup that was on the table, full of wine. For us, it's grape juice. Again, it's not what's inside of it that's important in and of itself. It's what happens when Jesus lifts it up. And this is called the common cup. Common because we all share in it, but common also because it was not a fancy cup. It was a regular cup that had been used for lots of things. But when Jesus took it, he lifted it up again. He gave thanks to God, and he gave it to his disciples, and he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." These are, let me come down here. These are the gifts that Jesus gives to us to draw us into God's presence, to help us to know that God is with us no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what is going on, no matter the struggles that we are a part of. Remember that God draws us in so that we can be in his presence. We can find through him what we can find nowhere else. And it doesn't have to be a fancy setup for communion. It doesn't have to be a fancy worship space. It can just be a space that you set up, you put together, that maybe just has a copy of a Bible. It doesn't even have to be a big one. It can just be like a little one. Maybe it just has a single candle that you're able to set up. Maybe whatever it is that works for you, that God is helping you to understand, to draw you into his presence, that makes it holy. Because God wants you to know that he is with you, especially in times of hardship and struggle and tragedy and crisis. I invite you to take some time this week to find those holy spaces, to find those holy places where you can go to God, where you can be in his presence, where you can be set apart for a time and to know the comfort and the strength that he gives. Go out this week. Find your space. Know that God is with you, and that for joys and celebrations or crises and tragedy, know that he has set that space apart so that we can be in covenant and relationship with one another, and so that we can go forward in this world. Go and do all this in the name of the one who came and showed us a new way of drawing in to God's presence, and the one who made it possible for us to be able to do it at all times and all places. Let us go and do this in Christ's name. Amen. I invite you to take a few moments now and think through just some time of reflection. You can see the reflection questions here on the order of service on our website, or just think through where you can find your space and where you can find your time this week to go be in God's presence. And when you're ready, I invite you to join in singing our last song for today.